I'm Amy Freeman and I'm presenting today with my colleague David Reid. We work in the Specialist Police Cyber Investigation Team. Our Fraud Protect colleague Neil McKenzie from the Police Economic Crime Unit will also be covering specific types of fraud on this presentation. The aim of this presentation is to enhance your knowledge that you can share this with the adults you engage with in the community, your family, friends and colleagues. If you have any questions, please use the chat facility, and we should also have some time at the end to discuss and answer any questions you may have. Okay, so first we're going to look at some common misconceptions. In our role, we deal with obviously a number of victims, and these are some of the things that they've said to us. So as you can see, there's lots of different, I'm not going to read them all out to you because obviously you can all see them, but just a couple of specifics I'd just like to go on is a lot of people think that Google check all website content to ensure search results do not contain any scams or fake sites. Obviously that's not the case. And also a lot of people believe that the browser padlock symbol indicates that you're always on a genuine and trusted website. That browser padlock symbol actually just indicates that the connection is secure. So you have a secure connection at what you're looking at, but it doesn't always mean that it's a genuine or trusted website. David, do you have anything to add on that at all?
No, other than the fact that clearly there are an awful lot more, and in quite a lot of cases, victims say, well, I thought that the security advice that I've heard applies to other people, not myself. So pretty much as it says at the top, they think that they're not going to be affected because they think I haven't got much personal information or money in my accounts, etc. But everybody, all of us, including pretty much everyone who uses the internet, is a target and can be a target by cyber criminals.
Okay. So then we're going to just cover securing an online account. So the most important thing is a password. We find that a lot of people have weak or just not very secure passwords at all. And that's unfortunately how a lot of the people we deal with are becoming victims. So this is just some advice that we're going to give for you to pass on to other people, especially. So passwords need to be quite long and secure. So you're looking at least 12 characters. You can use a mixture of capitals, lowercase letters, numbers and symbols. What we'd say is, don't use words that are relatable to you. So, words, dates, names, we have a lot of people that will use their favourite football team, their mother's maiden names. This is quite easy information for a cyber criminal to find out. So a good way of doing that is by using the 3 random words. This is advice that comes from National to us that we pass on to everybody else. And it's the whole process of the 3 random words. So it's words that and they're relatable to you and you'd remember them, but it's not something that another person would think to associate with you. What I'd always say is as well is don't share passwords with anyone, no matter who they claim to be. I'd even include your family and friends in that. Those passwords are for you, they're for your accounts. Another piece of advice is always change default passwords on a new device. So if you're given a device that has a password, if there's that facility, which the 99% of the time is, change that default password. And the most important thing is always use a different password for each account or site that you use. Specifically as well, your email account, because normally most people will only have one email account. So if that's an easy password for someone to guess or hack into that account, once they're in that email account, that gives them a very broad access to other online accounts that you have or you use.
Yeah, just picking up on that, Amy, the last 2 bullet points, with a lot of people, I'm sure, going to be receiving new devices, smart devices, cameras, game systems, consoles, etc. for Christmas presents soon. The default passwords is very clearly important for that as well. So any device that is connected to the internet needs to really have a password that you've set that follows the information that Amy gave earlier. And also just to emphasize why, exactly as Amy said, that it is important that you should, in an ideal world, have a different password for every account, but certainly, as has just been mentioned, for the email account is coming on the next slide. So if you can whiz over to that, Amy. It's mainly because of things that I'm sure you've heard of in the news. They're quite regular at the moment, unfortunately, data breaches. So what a data breach is, certainly in this particular context, is an organization, company, or website that you or I or anyone else has used that then basically leaks that data out. It might be because they've made a mistake, they have not secured their data properly. It might be that hackers got in and extracted that data, but the end result is that that data is then made public. And once criminals get hold of that, and they do, they share that amongst themselves. There are places on the internet and the dark web that they use to share this information. Basically, they have a huge database of things such as customer names that have been leaked, passwords that were used in these particular accounts, and other information. So if you have used one password on more than one account, what the criminals will do is take advantage of that and get that one password from the leak site, and they will try it on other accounts. They'll try it on your Amazon account, your PayPal account, what other sites you may use. And if they get lucky, they will get in. And if you've used the same password for all their accounts, realistically, they will get through and access all of them. And you clearly don't want that. So to minimize the effect of a data breach, which we have no control over, unfortunately, but to minimize that effect, you should, and also advise pretty much everyone you work with and support, to have separate passwords for each account, and certainly for email. There is this website that you may want to go towards the end of this presentation if you've not been to it before or not been to it recently. Have been pwned. It's pronounced. It seems a strange spelling, but it is correct. And with this site, you put in your email address. Don't put any passwords in, anything else, but you put your email address in, and it will search to see whether your email address has been linked to any accounts that have been part of a data breach in the last 5 or 6 years. And when I put some of my email addresses, some of them are affected. And what that tells me is that I need to go onto those accounts and make sure that I've secured those accounts by changing the password, or if I don't need that account anymore, to close it down. If you don't do that, it could mean that your personal data, whatever you supply to that website or that company, is then accessible to criminals, or it's still accessible to criminals on the internet. So it's worth a visit on that website later on if you haven't, as I say, visited it there. Okay, should we move on to the next slide? Okay, so Amy mentioned passwords, which clearly lots of us already know about, and hopefully you are using a strong long password, as was mentioned. But there's something that really, really has a fantastic effect on your cybersecurity, and that is enabling this thing called two-factor authentication. Lots of us, I'm sure, know about it, but it's something, again, if you know about it, we want you to pass this information on to the adults you support and to your families, etc., because it can make a real difference to the security of your accounts. We've recently done some sort of stats and looking at the figures that we get from victims that have this particular feature turned on. This is a free feature, literally. You just turn on an account and hey presto, it makes it on average 400 or 500 times more secure. So basically it means that rather than just relying on a password, you have an extra way of verifying that you are the genuine person that should access that account, and a criminal wouldn't have access to that information. It's because you'll receive it either as a text message on your trusted phone and phone number, or it might be on an app on a trusted device like a tablet or a phone. But at the end of the day, you use it to authenticate that you are the genuine user of that account and that password. So not only will it stop criminals getting into your account, even if they've guessed the password or have tricked you into revealing it, but also it will give you a notification that someone's possibly even trying to get into that account. So I would certainly advise you, if nothing else, on the cyber elements that we're going to cover today, make sure you have turned on two-factor authentication on all your important accounts. And certainly that's the things like shopping accounts, social media accounts, things like that. Other things just to talk about, I'm sure you're aware of about things like keeping your devices up to date, your operating systems, your laptops, your phones, etc. And ideally, you want those to be on automatic updates. But also, if all this talk of having separate passwords, and this is for all of us, whether we use 1,000 accounts or 10, realistically, if you have multiple accounts, you are going to clearly have multiple passwords if you're doing it the correct way that we're advising. And this is where you might want to consider using a password manager. Lots of these are built in free of charge on modern devices. So if you've got an iPhone, you've got an Apple password manager built in. If you've got an Android, Google device, Samsung device, that's got a password manager built in. But you can use others. Some are free, some are commercial products. but use a reputable one, do your own research. We're not here to sort of advise which is the best, because it depends on what you want it for. But I would certainly look at them if you haven't considered them, because what they do is they generate passwords for you, so that you don't have to worry about how long to make the password, how strong to make it, because it does it for you. It then remembers it securely, and it then logs in for you in future whenever you visit that account. So basically it takes the effort out of having to deal with passwords. So it is really worth thinking about if you've not considered it in the past. Okay. So I just mentioned about criminals might be able to get your password if you give it away unwittingly, being tricked into giving out password. And that's something I'm sure you've dealt with lots of times. I'm sure we've all had emails and things doing this. But the overall term to describe all of these things, and they're given some horrible terms. Realistically, we don't like using them. I'm sure Neil's going to mention these later on, but there's things like vishing, phishing, smishing, horrible terms. But overall, they're really known as social engineering attacks. They're tricking us or anybody that uses computers, the internet, devices, etc., into revealing information or extracting information from our accounts. So we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail because it applies to us. We're all targets, but this is information that you may not immediately sort of be aware of that criminals are after. So even includes things like you might have an email mentioning a quotation you've received from a company. So you might have had a quotation for a kitchen upgrade, or some landscape gardening or something like that. You might have had a quote for some work, whatever it might be. That's of interest to a criminal, because they might be able to use that to trick you or the company that you're dealing with to pay basically them instead of the genuine fees for the order, or for the when the actual work is completed for the invoice. They're clearly after things like payment details, credit card details, etc. And I'm sure Neil will cover some of that later on. But they're also after your personal contacts, because using personal contact information, they then can use that to then go on and trick and scam other people. So it might well be that someone gets hold of your say email account, and it's got lots of contacts, or they get onto your social media account and they see all the people that follow you. Those people then will be at risk, because they will be using the same scam techniques for you, but they'll use it for those particular people. So it's all about protecting really everybody really through social engineering attacks. So I think over to you, Amy, on the next few bits.
Okay, thank you, David. So as David said, email phishing. So this is one that we see quite a lot of with the victims that we deal with. Email criminals are very, very, they're clever, and they can fake an email and trick people into giving away personal information, passwords, and payment details. As you can see from these emails at the bottom, they're actually really convincing. You'll have real logos on them. The examples we've used here, TV license and Royal Mail, that's a lot of what we see. Another one here is one that a school had supposedly sent out to parents. This actually happened. And like David said, they can appear to be from suppliers, services you use, people so the most important thing in this is don't click on any links, and advise people, don't click on a link. Always use another verified way to check what it is you're being sent. So if, for example, a TV license is coming up for renewal, you get this, and say this email sent to 100 people, a small percentage of them are probably expecting a TV licensing renewal. So without thinking, they'll click on the link in this and end up passing on lots of sort of personal data and payment information. Whereas all you need to do is actually don't click on the link and go via a search engine, search for the relevant TV license in the correct website, and then go from there and enter your details. So that's a very important thing to remember. Don't click on links within emails. Always go onto a verified source and check through the actual website details, or pick up the phone and contact them on a telephone number that is the correct one to use. So that leads us on now to scam text messages. This is something we've also seen a lot of in the last sort of few months. On the side there, you can see a mobile phone. This is actually a message thread that David and I received from one of our victims. I mean, from looking at that, would any of you know which is the scam link? Because it isn't actually that easy to see which is the scam one. It's actually really difficult. So, you know, regard anything like this as suspicious. You know, again, don't click on the links. It might come through on a message thread that you've already got, because that's what happened to our victim here. Because, you know, that can happen. They can get into a message thread. So don't click on links. Again, like I said with the emails, you know, go to the verified site, check it properly. Okay. And like David said before, we get a lot of people who have social media accounts taken over. For example, I mean, I've spoken to a victim today about it. A Facebook account was taken over, and the fraudster, acting as her, had sent out lots of messages to her friends saying that she needed emergency funds, she was in trouble, she needs some money, and the fraudster spent time on this. You know, the messages were very realistic, and people did send money to these bank details. So, you know, this is a very important piece of information to pass on to people that you're dealing with, your friends, family, not to click on links, and not to trust that a message may be from a friend asking for money, especially. You know, always pick up the phone, check with your friend, your family member, because they probably do not even know that their accounts have been taken over. So, as we say here, to stop phishing attacks, never click on links, downloaded attachments, or respond to unverified emails, texts, or social media posts. David, do you have anything to add before I go on to the slide?
No, I mean, as you said, going onto the site, if you've got a genuine app, if you've already downloaded, let's say, I know lots of us have received the Royal Mail delivery ones and Hermes, etc. If you've already got the genuine app because you've been dealing with them, it's all right using that app because you know that it goes to a trusted source. But if not, as Amy said, you need to go to the genuine real website to check, or some other method, as she mentioned, or phoning them up, etc. Excellent. Okay, and I think we're then on another part of social engineering, which is extremely popular at the moment, unfortunately. And I think very likely that some of the adults that you may work with possibly are greater targets of this particular technique than some of the others that we've mentioned. And again, this is social engineering, but it's where some messages, it might be a WhatsApp message, it could in theory be a phone message, but most often it's email or WhatsApp type message, and it's claiming to be a manager, a colleague, supervisor, or maybe even a carer in some cases, and it's claiming that that person needs you to buy or the victim to buy vouchers or products, and it's sometimes even tickets, online tickets. But in most cases in Northamptonshire, this comes down to vouchers, and the instructions will be that these vouchers are needed for a birthday present for someone, or it might be for an event that the organization is running. It might even have some elements of truth. They might know enough about a real event that you've advertised to give some details. And the other details might seem quite valid at the time. But what they'll get you to do is tell you to go and buy vouchers. Sometimes we're talking about £2,000 or £3,000 worth of vouchers in some cases. They'll tell you to go and buy these vouchers and send the details off to them. You think that you're doing a good job. You think you're going to be reimbursed, but you've just now sent off these vouchers to a criminal within about 5 seconds of you sending them. They're off, they're used, they're sold on to other people. And it's not always possible to get your money back. In most cases, you certainly won't get 100% of your money back. So it's, again, same as we said before, but it's verifying these things. If you get a message from someone saying this is what you need to do, you need to ring them. You need to check that that's a genuine number. If you've received it from some obscure account or some, as I say, WhatsApp message or email, they'll often back it up by saying, oh, sorry, my phone's not working at the moment. And they'll tell you that because they don't want you to ring to verify, but you still need to do that. So just out of interest, we'll talk a bit more about resources later on, both from the cybercrime side and from the fraud side, from the resources that Neil has available. But we also have a CEO fraud voucher fraud. It's a silly name, CEO fraud, but voucher fraud poster that you're welcome to get from us if this is something you'll find useful. Okay, but certainly need to watch out for that. And then the other side of this, which I think is on the next slide, is this thing called payment diversion fraud or invoice fraud. And really, it's the other side of this where invoices are concerned, similar to that one that I mentioned earlier about the quotations, or the quotes for a product or for a service that you are thinking of choosing with a particular company. This happens with those and also with invoices. So your organization, or you personally, or the people that you work with may receive an invoice. It may be for genuine items, genuine services, everything went well, and that invoice needs paying. But unfortunately, the payment details have been changed to the criminals, or to an account the criminal at least has control of. And if you pay that without checking, you're now paying the criminal, and somewhere along the line, you're going to have to now pay the genuine invoice to the real company, the real service that you should have originally been paying for. So again, you need to check, you need to verify these things. If it's the same details, they've not changed. If it's the same one that you regularly get, that's fine. But if there's any doubt at all, realistically, it's better to check anyway. You need to confirm with that particular company, supplier, etc. If you work with any organizations that this is a concern, we have some other bits and pieces that might be useful for you, such as information that you can put on your invoice, or some posters and bits and pieces. There may be payments, a department, etc. This clearly may not apply to all of us on this particular call now. But also, we've seen that it happens with people dealing with expenses or wages. So we've even seen it with small organizations, charities that have only got 5 or 6 people working for them, but they receive an email saying, oh, I've changed my bank details to this new account. Can you make sure that all my expenses go into that account? And if you don't verify that, if you don't check that it's really that person emailing, and it's not a criminal pretending to be that particular volunteer or employee, you will end up paying the wrong person. So again, it's important to check that. Okay.
Okay, so this leads us on nicely now to how you're going to protect your devices. So what are people actually protecting their devices from? So you have to look at things like, you have malware that obviously can infect devices, viruses, spyware, trojans, ransomware. These are some of the most common types of malware that we see from the victims that we speak to. We also have occasionally spyware incidents. So spyware can secretly monitor typing, mouse movements. In some cases, if the location is turned on your devices, cameras and microphones. And we also have instances of ransomware as well. This is where your device will be encrypted, and that stops you having access to your device, photographs, documents, and that's where the criminal will demand payment for decryption and recovery of the data. At the moment, we see a lot of organisations, schools and charities that are at risk from ransomware, because some criminals have made like the use of remote working as well, but everyone is at risk of this. So this is something mindful to be mindful of, and to tell the people that you're speaking to about, because this can affect anybody. It isn't just organisations, it can happen to individuals as well. So how are you going to protect your devices? Okay, so you need to ensure that default passwords have been changed. So we've discussed that already with passwords. Massively important thing. And you can change them on your routers, smart devices, and anything connected to the internet. A lot of people now are having toys and games that are connected to the internet, not realizing that they can change passwords. Well, you can change your default password on them. With regards to phones, again, we'd always advise having a password or the biometric lock on your phones or tablets. And also with automatic updates, always activate them, because most modern phones, you can put them on an auto update. And then if you keep the apps and devices up to date, the software up to date, that can stop anything happening to your device. Because when there is a software update, a cybercriminal can take advantage of any vulnerabilities that are on a device before a software update is enabled on a phone. Again, always use a good antivirus package on your PCs. Again, advise people that you're dealing with and speaking to on a daily basis about these things. And again, the last thing is just backing up important documents, because we all have a lot of documents on our devices. Our phones contain sometimes thousands and thousands of photographs and videos. And I think a lot of people don't always think about backing them up or saving them to anything, because if they're gone, they're gone. So always have a regular backup for all the things that these are things that you class as your personal things. So keep them safe. There is some examples on the bottom of some antivirus packages that are available. Again, you know, do your research on them. We'd never advise using a specific one. Some are free, some you pay for, but these are some of the packages available in the UK.
Okay, so on the last sort of cyber crime related slide, and the reason we've put this here is because it sort of blends in quite nicely with some of the fraud topics and threats that Neil's going to be discussing in a moment and covering. And that is this thing, again, unfortunately, silly name, we don't name them this, but computer software service fraud is what it's called. But it relates to things that I think you probably either received yourself or certainly know about. It's in the past, it was quite easy to identify. It was someone ringing up saying they were from Microsoft and they needed you to do something to your computer. Nowadays, it's a bit more sophisticated with a lot of people working from home and clearly having laptops and many devices at home. They might claim to be IT support for the organization you work for or for a company that you do business with. It may even be pretending to be an IT shop that you actually have visited. But at the end of the day, what they're trying to get you to do is change settings to reduce the security of your internet settings, your network, your computer, etc., and to then somehow gain remote access to it. So that's usually by downloading software, but this will not be obvious unless you sort of aware of what they do. They'll sometimes tell you that you need to do certain things to stop a virus on your computer. They'll even use excuses such as, did you know that your computers basically putting viruses onto your neighbor's computer or damaging their internet connection? Clearly all sort of lies. Anything like this is just a technique to gain access to a device. But when they do have access, they will basically sit in the background, watch what you're doing. They'll often get you to visit a site that they're interested in, maybe even do some online banking so they can see account numbers, etc. This could, in theory, happen through pop-up messages. So you could be, and again, this is for all of us to be aware of, if you're on the internet doing something and a little message pops up that you think is a warning for a virus or that you need to go and download this particular security software or something like that, check it, verify it. If you're not sure of it, if you've not got the sort of the technical skills to verify that, you need to check it. Don't just sort of blindly go to websites and download things, because that's pretty much, as Amy was just saying, that's one way they can get malware on your computer. But it starts off mostly by phone calls. And as I say, this leads into quite nicely, I think, what Neil's going to cover in a moment. So over to you, Neil, I think now.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Oh, good stuff.
Lovely. Just for the benefit of everybody, I'm Neil Mackenzie. I'm the Fraud Protect and Prevent Officer for Northants Police, and I do work closely with David and Amy because obviously cyber and fraud do link in very, very closely with how they work. I've been in the role for 6 months. I've been an officer for 18 years, but in the last 6 months, my learning curve has gone astronomically with the amount of frauds that there are and the learning that there is, that how big this problem is around the UK and particularly for local residents of Northampton. I put the first slide up there, which is just as an impact factor, I guess, just to show people the kind of level that we're talking about here. £20 million is lost to fraud in the last 12 months to residents of Northamptonshire. It works out to around about 40% of all crime fraud, which begs the question, why is it not as prominent perhaps as the burglaries and the robberies and so on that go on? Because you are 3 times more likely to be a victim of fraud than you are burglary, and 19 times more likely than you are to be robbed or suffer antisocial behaviour or criminal damage. So it's a significant element of crime is fraud. We only report, or Action Fraud only receive reports of around about 15% of the actual fraud that occurs, and it begs the question, why don't people report fraud? And you're probably all shouting at the screen because they can't be bothered. There's no point. Perhaps they're embarrassed about it, or they don't want to tell perhaps relatives of the money that they've given away to fraudsters inadvertently. So fraud is kind of a hidden crime, really. Only the victim and the offender know about it. because it's not the broken window that everybody sees, it's not the fight in the street or the robbery that gets publicized all over the television sets. It is literally the victim against the offender, and that's all that know about it, and it stays quite hidden. So the passion plea is that people do report frauds, they do give us the information. We may not be able to investigate every single element of it in reality, but the intelligence of the fraud being reported gives us a bigger picture and the direction to go in as to how to combat them. There are around about 170 plus types of fraud out there. They're all derivations of a different type, but there's many different ways that fraudsters use, and they are constantly evolving their ways, as David and Amy have mentioned earlier, of how they commit their crimes. So it's impossible for me to impart information on every single type of fraud that we get coming through our doors or through to Action Fraud. We could be here for the next 4 or 5 hours trying to do that, and I'm sure you don't really want to sit here and listen to that. What I do like to concentrate on is the ones that really affect people greatly, and what we call high harm crimes. And there can be ones that are affecting older people, or they've lost an awful lot of money, or they're vulnerable and intimidated in particular, and we class them as high harm. One of those, if we can perhaps move on to the next slide, Amy, is romance fraud. The slide says there, is your perfect match really who they say they are? It says it does, so it says on the tin really. What the next part about is if you think you have been a victim, don't feel ashamed or embarrassed. And of course, I've mentioned that already, and that's what people do. They do feel ashamed, they do feel embarrassed, they feel silly that they've become a victim. But what people have to realize is that victims and your supported adults have to realize is that criminals are experts at impersonating people, and they will spend hours and hours researching for their scams to contact people. Romance fraud, it comes generally through, you've all heard about it, I'm sure, dating crime. It's about, from us, it's about imparting the information to the wider community to get people to talk about it generally, sharing the information so that people can start talking about it more often. Fraudsters do not want us to talk about fraud because it thwarts their tactics and they have to change them then. So let's talk about it as much as possible. Internet dating sites for fraud are great for somebody who wants to find a friend or a life partner. Why not? But they do have to be careful because fraudsters target those sites, particularly dating sites, but also gaming sites, WhatsApp, Hangouts, Google Hangouts and such like. They engineer a friendship or a relationship, and the object is for a financial gain. They're often because they target people, obviously, that they're lonely. Just to give you an indication for romance side of it, there's around about £11,500 per person is lost to romance fraud in Northamptonshire, which is an awful lot of money. £1.1 million so far in the last 12 months. That's how many victims there are. You can work out the mathematics on it yourself. The cash side is a big loss. Now, we got fraud victims from the age of 15, 16, 17, up to 90 years of age, and they all lose money. But if you lose money at an older age and it's your pension, it's your life savings, to lose that kind of money, you can't recoup it. And that's a massive loss to them. But equally, or oppositely to that, is the emotional effect romance fraud has on people. What tends to happen is, and we'll go through that slide there, is the people will be groomed for a significant amount of time, and essentially the victim will fall in love with the person that they're seeing on that dating site. They give them all sorts of reasons, and there's a few points on there about claiming to live and work abroad. The hooks are that they're good looking, they're intelligent, they're career people, they're a soldier, they're working overseas as engineers, and they use those tactics to gain a hook. They pressure you to move away from a website, which is an important part. So the dating site's the predominant location that fraudsters target. They create a persona on there of this wonderful person that actually is kind of like what that person is looking for. So they target you in that way. But they ask you quickly to move across to a site that is encrypted. These Google Hangouts, WhatsApp are to name but a couple. And they are sites where the information, the exchange of detail between the two parties are only for those two people, and it gets lost, because if it's on the main dating site, everything's stored and an investigation can ensue from that side of things. So one of the first red flags is if somebody says they've been asked to move across to another site to have that conversation go on. No, they stay on the site where they are. They tell you to hide a relationship from friends and family. Again, they don't want to answer awkward questions that you might be told to ask. Fraudsters will ask a lot of questions to gain further personal information, but actually they'll tell you very little. They constantly make excuses why they can't meet. They're not able to pay for flights. They have sick people. They claim that they maybe have an ill or a relative that is stranded, and they drop hints about money, generally speaking. It says there they appear vulnerable, emotional, and is desperate in need of your help. Yeah, they do. They mirror what you're saying. They use empathy to gain that trust and build that rapport. So financial support. They might ask for financial support. They might ask for money because they've got a sick relative that needs help. But what tends to happen also is that they will coerce the victim into giving money, in the sense of, I want to come and live with you, I want to be with you, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, but I can't afford to. And the victim then says, well, I'll give you the money, I'll pay for that, I'll do that for you. Well, therein lies the psychological side, that the victim then says, well, it was my fault, I gave the money, it was up to me, I did it. So again, it might be a reason why it doesn't get reported, because they feel responsible themselves. So that's it. By the time large sums of money are asked for and the alarm bells are ringing, for required the financial assistance appears to have a greater plausibility. There's a few points that we tend to try and give out. I don't think there's a slide on it. It's regarding an acronym that police like to use, which is DATES. So things like, don't rush into an online relationship. You get to know the person, not the profile. Analyze their profile, look at the confirm the person's identity, for argument's sake, check the person's genuinely putting their name on their profile pictures, or any repeatedly used phrases and the term dating scam into your search engine. You can look at people like that. They can do a photo reverse image search, looking at the picture that they're showing in front of them. They can put it into a Google reverse image to see if that picture comes up on any other sites, and sometimes they come up as showing that they are scammers. So it's alarm bells that we're looking for, and it's about encouraging people to be careful and look at those. We're asking people to talk to friends and family. Be wary of anybody who tells you not to do that, not to talk to anybody. It's about how we intrusive, a little bit intrusive, I guess, when we're talking to victims. Evade scams, never send money. Bottom line with it is, you never ever send money. You stay on the dating site and the message service that you're on. Do not use email, phone, social media, or other messaging apps until you're confident that the person is who they say they are. I have quite a few victims that I've dealt with over the last 6 months on fraud, and the emotional side of it I mentioned earlier is probably the greater side of it. One in particular was an elderly lady who had been groomed for about 6 months, and she to the point where she'd taken a photograph from the screen, put it into a photo frame by the side of her bed, and she had idolized that person. That person existed, but not the person that she was talking to. She was talking to generally an organized crime group member. Now it could be a call center set in Zimbabwe, out of Mongolia, wherever in the world it is. It could be a call center, and that person that she's texting on a daily basis could be one of several people all the way through. One of the clues that's noted on there, on some of them that we've seen, is that the fraudster will never call their victim by their name. They will use things like honey, sweetheart, darling. And that's generally because they probably can't remember the name, because they're dealing with dozens of them at the same time. As I say, it's a business, and that's how they use it. So romance fraud is one of the most significant things. In fact, just to clarify the point I'm trying to make about the emotional side of it, this particular lady that I've dealt with, it took me 6 attempts to convince her that the person that she was conversing with was a fraudster. Eventually, when the penny dropped, she actually said to me, well, I might as well kill myself now. What's the point in me living anymore? I've just had lots of love and affection showered with it over the last 6 months, and you've now told me that person is a fraudster. And kind of felt guilty really for her, because she'd had that affection. She'd been lonely, she found somebody online, and she'd had that affection for that period of time. So it's a horrible crime. That's why it tends to highlight it a little bit more. Moving on, if you don't mind, Amy, to courier fraud. We'll have a quick look at that. It's the initial or the traditional courier fraud comes from fraudsters calling the victim, purporting to be police, bank, any organization that are in authoritative figures, and they claim that there's an ongoing investigation and they need that victim's help to solve that crime, that issue that's going on. Generally speaking, they will then get the victim to go and purchase items or go to the bank and retrieve money, and they would then put it into a bag, and the fraudster would then send a courier to collect that from the victim's home address, hence the term courier fraud. It does evolve, and as like I said at the beginning, they do evolve quite a lot. Frauds, authorized push payments comes kind of under the same barrier, really, where victims are contacted, as David and Amy mentioned earlier, where they are contacted and asked to transfer funds to a safe account. So it may be that somebody's called up from their bank to say, your bank account is being compromised, I'm from the fraud department, what we need to do is catch the people involved in this, and we think it's bank employees, and in order to help us do that, we need you to transfer some funds into a safe account, in inverted commas. They will then be told to go online or into the bank and transfer money to an account that they've been given by the fraudster. It's again a particularly heinous crime, going back to the top of the page there, which is they purport to be from the police, the bank, or other. That element is the initial trust. They also use the sense of urgency. It needs to be done now, otherwise you're going to lose money. So the trust element and the urgency are what the hooks are that the couriers or these fraudsters need to use, or they use on a regular basis. Police one particularly is quite prevalent in Northants. It has been used quite a number of times, where they've said, I'm a local police officer from Northants Police, your bank account has been compromised, we've got some fraudsters working in your local branch, could you go and help us out with this? Of course, as soon as the victim has heard the word police, there's an element of trust. Of course, officer, I'll help you. How can I help you? And they build up that trust that way. And of course, when we then realize it's fraud, we go in there and speak to them. We then have to build that trust up once again. It's very difficult for us to do that once they've already been scammed by who they perceive to be police. So it is a particularly horrible crime in that respect. They will promise you money. They do. They promise payment and support because you've helped them in order to capture the people that they're looking to try and get hold of. The fraudsters may already know some basic details about you, such as your name and address. And as has been mentioned already through from the previous slides that David and Amy had put up, there is data breaches which are sold on, really. Information is sold on to fraudsters all over the world, and that information is used, and they'll literally gather that information and use that and contact people. So everybody is open to fraud, particularly those that have been defrauded before are more likely to be defrauded again. It's a third time more likely to be taken advantage of in the next year or so. So it is important to, once the message has got over to somebody, they may become or may be targeted again in another type of fraud because their details are already out there. So what they can do to protect themselves with the passwords, with the change of addresses and such like, change of telephone numbers if need be, that is always a help. Bottom line there is a genuine police officer or organisation will never contact you to aid an investigation by withdrawing cash or purchasing items. So what I'd like to move on to is actually banking protocol. Now, because these particular type of crimes relate to people being coerced into going into the bank, be it romance fraud, go and get some money to send it on, courier fraud, go and get some money to move it on, transfer it. The banks have realized that there is an issue in that their customers are being defrauded out of money, and they've come out of their normal way of doing things and realized they need to help people. So they created a banking protocol in around about 2017. It's a partnership between financial institutions, law enforcement agencies, including Australian standards, that basically gets them to work together with a primary objective, being that they identify the individuals who are tricked into going into their local branches, prevent the fraud taking place, and provision of victim support to reduce that victim's future susceptibility to crime. So the banks, when they go in, rather when the person goes into the bank and asks for a significant amount of money, which may be out of the ordinary, to be transferred, it will trigger the teller behind the counter to ask a number of questions. And of course, victims who have their bank accounts there may be told by the fraudster, you'll be asked these questions, you must come up with some plausible reason. I'm getting money out to buy my grandson a car or do house repairs or whatever it is. But the teller will be asked to ask those questions, which are on the lines of what's the money being used for, who are you giving it to, was the withdrawal or transaction planned or unexpected, or significantly, have you been contacted by somebody claiming they are police, bank staffer or other trader in order to do this? And very often a fraudster will be on their phone in the bank with the victim listening to that conversation. The banks will ask those questions, and they will, if they feel that there is the merest possibility that the transaction could be fraudulent, they can freeze it, they can stop the transaction, and they will call the police as a matter of urgency. The banking protocol has saved an awful lot of money for victims over the time that it's been in place. We're talking millions and millions of pounds have been saved through this banking protocol. So it's a really good asset that we've got working with the banks. 2017, so it's still reasonably in its infancy, but it's getting worked on quite well. What the message to the public is, if the bank do question why you're moving your money, don't think it's being invasive. It is about protecting those individuals. So just be patient and be honest with them, and follow what they're suggesting to you. If we can move on, Amy. So we've put it down as telephone calls. Don't assume a phone call is authentic just because somebody knows your name. And again, that's just reiterating what's already been said. They will find out information about yourself, and they will use that information to the best of their abilities to defraud you. And they've practiced it, so they are going to be fluent at it. With regards to telephone calls, they can spoof numbers. So if you get a telephone call to a landline, for argument's sake, a fraudster can make that telephone number look like it is your local police, your local bank, or a local call charge number generally. So they could be phoning from anywhere in the world, but they can make the number look realistic. So it is important just to bear that in mind. To give you an indication of value, I mentioned £20 million lost through residents for all fraud. £6 million of that money is lost to voice type crimes, and that is where a fraudster has had a conversation with a victim and coerced them into following their line and give them money in whatever method they're doing. That's that's over a quarter of all the crimes is relating to telephones. Again, it bodes the question: how do you stop it? Through mobiles, obviously, you can block the calls. Through landlines is probably the most significant way, because that is where a lot of the higher harm victims are being scammed through their landline system. One of the simple methods that can be used, and I'm sure many of you are already aware, is a call blocker system. You can buy them off the internet. There's so many different types out there, but all the major companies have call blockers. For instance, Virgin Media, Sky, BT, and they are free to all customers. They block in different ways and they block to different levels, so it is worth doing a little bit of research. We have a system that we recommend called TrueCall. It is a paid-for system, but it is kind of 100% effective in that the only numbers that it allows through to the phone to the victim, and again for vulnerable people it's quite handy, are the ones that they want to come through. and which is sometimes a little bit awkward, because if you've got a doctor's surgery calling somebody on a regular basis, it might be a withheld number and therefore it would be blocked. So there are issues with trying to get it to work properly, but nevertheless it blocks 80% of known dodgy calls, if you like, that are sent, that come through. And if you think about it from a point of view of a scammer, they'll phone up and they will talk to from a call blocker system, they'll talk to a voicemail. As soon as they get a voicemail, they will tend to put the phone down and move on to somebody else, so you're automatically stopping that happening. So my message on the telephone lines, on the landline systems in particular, is get a call blocker of some description, because it will aid it. Stopping people calling in, because it's such a significant route that fraudsters take. Once they get you on the phone, they can convince you of anything. Investment fraud is one of the biggest ones, because investments losses are in their multi-million pounds a year, and people are seeing something online and then they'll suddenly get a phone call on their landline, and this smooth talking salesman will create a scenario where you cannot refuse to invest, and that works out to sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds within a day that have been sent to fraudsters. So telephone systems are a massive portal that we can try and block in some way. Sorry, Amy, if you want to just quickly move on to money muling. Money muling, it happens generally to younger people. If I talk about it from a clean bank account point of view, money muling is relating to money laundering, which is the process that criminals have to go through in order to clean the ill-gotten gains that they receive from anywhere. They need to make it look legitimate, and the way they do that partly is through money muling. It's gaining somebody's bank account, a clean, fresh bank account that they can put money in, take it out the other end, and it's suddenly washed and cleaned because it comes out of a legitimate bank account. People do fall foul of this. Younger people, perhaps students and university students, may fall foul of it because they may get advertisements offering them the opportunity to earn 50 quid by putting a couple of thousand into their bank account. And let's face it, what student on a low bursary wouldn't look at taking it? In fact, we've had statistics to say that even though they know about it, some students would still do it. So it's not good, because they are money laundering. But it equally happens to romance victims as well. It can be a way of engaging them to gain trust with the offender. That offender can contact them on the Facebook sites and the dating sites and say, look, I'll tell you what, I'll give you some money to put in your bank account because I can't do it through my Turkish bank account or wherever it is. And they accept it, take it out the other end and send it on in Bitcoin. That victim, that romance victim, then becomes a money muler, and obviously moving money around in large quantities on behalf of the offenders. So it's important to bear that one in mind. Even if you're unaware that the money you're transferring was illegally obtained, you may play an important role in fraud and money laundering, as mentioned. So that's kind of where I'm at, David. I don't know whether you've got anything to add on that at all.
Well, there's a few questions for you, Neil, I think, regarding romance fraud in the chat. So
okay.
What I'll do, I'll quickly move on to the next slide and just cover online shopping just very briefly, and then we'll give you some time to answer those questions and any for us that are there as well, if that's all right.
Lovely.
Okay, so I'm going to do this fairly quickly because we've put this at the end about whenever any of us or the people that we work with do online shopping or use online auctions, because I'm sure you're aware that, as was mentioned before, coming up to Christmas, a lot more people are using online stores. A lot more people are doing research and visiting stores that they perhaps haven't in the past, that they're not sure whether they're genuine or not. And also with things like Black Friday and Cyber Monday coming up, the biggest days of the year for online purchases. So this is our advice on how to stay safe and reduce the risk realistically. So as is mentioned before, when we were just talking about search results on misconceptions earlier on, when you're doing search for products, places to buy things, avoid the sponsored links, avoid the things that are adverts or sponsored links, because all search engines, including Google, put those there because they're paid to put them there and they don't vet them. It could well be that you click on something that says it's a genuine company and you'll be linked to a phishing site. Google are paid to do that. They put that there. They don't really care. So you need to be aware of that and avoid those. Go for the genuine search results, or talk to people that have used that site before. Maybe talk to your friends on social media or your family and friends about things like that. Also, when you visit a website, you just need to check that the web address is correct, or if you're typing it in from a flyer or an advert or something like that you've seen, type it in carefully, because quite a lot of people buy web addresses that are similar to ones that have been featuring in adverts and genuine companies, and you want to make sure you're on the genuine one, not using a fake site. Also, things like social media posts. A lot of these at the moment, an awful lot of them on things like Facebook and Twitter, but all social media offering discounts. And if you click here, you'll get 10% off your next order at Marks and Spencer or whatever. Most of these are fake. Whatever you do, you need to check them. You need to visit the site first and see whether that's a genuine thing. Do not go clicking on links and putting in bank details, etc. And then a couple of the things, make sure you use a trusted payment provider or credit card if you've got it, because realistically, it's giving you an awful lot of cover for fraud, to get your money back, to claim things back, and a lot of ways of actually moving the problem onto the payment provider or the credit card company to then worry about how to get that money back once they've refunded you. That's what you want to do. Never ever accept someone, whether you're selling something on an auction or buying something, never accept someone who says, oh, you can't pay by credit card or a payment provider that's trusted. You instead need to pay by bank transfer or by a particular type of PayPal account called PayPal Friends and Family. Realistically, if anyone tells you to do that, it's because of a scam. It's because they don't want that money to be claimed back from them once you realize that you've been scammed. So pay by credit card and trusted payment provider, as mentioned. Also, fairly obvious, but when you finish with an account, when you've done your shopping or whatever you've done, it's important to log out, because it's possible that if someone else uses that device, or if it's a mobile device and you lose it, that if that account's still logged on, they can still buy things in that name or in that particular account. So we have got information. I think on the next slide, Amy, I think we've got lots of resources, as mentioned earlier. We've got one on online shopping, which I don't think is actually on here, but we can make those available to you. They can be shared out with anyone that needs them, or printed out for you. So if you've got people to give these out, if you think some of these are useful, let us know. We'll happily send these to you. And basically, you can be our eyes and ears on this, helping us sort of see these telltale signs of cybercrime and fraud, and to stop them going any further, really. And then, do you want to, I know you haven't got long, Neil, but do you want to just answer those questions in the chat about fraud?
Sorry, yeah, I've just actually put some
brilliant.
messages back up actually
Excellent.
on there,
Brilliant.
particularly about the, I just thought I'd put them straight on there. But essentially, yes, we highlight the romance fraud simply because it is one of the most impactful and the most harmful crimes that are to victims out there, particularly the elderly. You know, as mentioned in the emotional side of it, we have had cases, in fact, to put the dour side on it, where people have contemplated suicide as a result of being taken advantage of to the extent they have. So it is a terrible crime. And obviously, in the second question with regards to genuine romance fraud victims, it is unlikely that the police would ever take action if they were unwittingly taken in and giving money to fraudsters through the muling, or what's it called, the offering money out. So it's unlikely that we would take action against genuine romance fraud victims in that case.
Yeah, just to finish up with, we're going to put our email addresses back on in a moment, but just on, if you can just whiz back to the action fraud one. Sorry, Amy. But it's important, as Neil said, so anything that you see, that the people that you support, adults you work with and their families, please do either help them report or ask them to report, because if we don't know about it, we can't deal with it. We can't use it as information that will help stop all of these things. So we're never going to be able to stamp it out, but clearly the more information we have, the better. So please do report this through to Action Fraud. And I think if you can whiz back to the contact email addresses, Amy, just in case anyone has any questions or wants to email directly for type of resources or help, we're happy to do that. And I think we've got all our addresses on there, which, sorry, Amy, you've got to whiz back all the way back to the third slide, I think now. There we are. Brilliant. So you're welcome to email us on those. Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. Anything to add, Amy?
No. Does anybody else have any questions at all for us?
No, okay. I think that's all good.
I should take the silence as everything's all good then. Okay, so thank you ever so much, everybody, for coming to this presentation today. And if you do require any resources from us or any further information, then please email us on the email addresses that are on the screen. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.